Friends, we have a very special guest today on the Elite Educator. Her name is Jennifer Turner, and she's a veteran secondary school English teacher. While she began her career in Brampton, Ontario, she spent the last 20 years at her own alma mater, Port Credit Secondary School in Mississauga, Ontario, and has been the head of the languages department for over 12 years. Welcome, Jennifer Turner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al. Lovely to chat with you.
Thank you so much for coming on today. So you've been teaching at your own alma mater for over 2 decades. What's it like to return to the school that you graduated from and lead the school in an area that you love?
It's been amazing. When I first started, I started in 2004. There were several teachers that were still my teachers. They hadn't retired yet. And it was very difficult for me to switch from calling them Mr. So-and-so and then being able to use their first names. The memories of my time at Port Credit were fantastic. I loved my 5 years there, and it's been so lovely. And, when I meet my kids on the first day, I always tell them, I was a graduate of these hallowed halls as well. The kids will look for me in the yearbooks and they'll try to find my pictures. And it's been lovely. And to grow up with a school, our school was actually created in 1919. So it's one of the oldest schools in the Peel region. And it's been lovely celebrating the 100th anniversary, and just being able to be part of that community has been fantastic. And I will finish my career there and because I'm just so proud of what Port Credit does.
Now, you've been head of the languages department for 12 plus years. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen in how students engage with literature?
Dr. Al, in the last couple of years, we're dealing with AI. We're dealing with, the idea of computers being able to generate ideas. We have seen interest in kids, sort of in novels. We've seen a huge change in the diversity of texts, which has been amazing. We have worked really hard. My former head, who was also my grade 9 English teacher, when he retired in 2013, I took over, and he and I had worked very closely trying to establish, diverse texts while still balancing the classics and with the contemporary novels and works that we do. We're trying to still encourage the students to read and enjoy what they're reading, as opposed to just always sort of relying on AI and relying on their phones or technology. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge. But I would say those are probably some of the biggest challenges that we have.
Well, people say that AI is a big change. I mean, when I went through high school and university, we had something called Cole's Notes that helped you to get an insight into some of this. Really, this is just another upgraded Cole's Notes to help students that otherwise, I'd say, are challenged in these areas of Shakespeare and the classics.
And absolutely. And I think you're an ostrich if you, and put your head in the sand sort of idea if you refuse to acknowledge it. I think there is a challenge for educators, especially in English, is that a lot of the students haven't quite figured out how to use their own critical thinking skills. And so what we're trying to do is trying to encourage them to use what I call their own brain versus Google brain. And we know that any internet technology, anything is a tool, and as long as it's being used properly, then it can be really helpful. It's when it replaces that critical thinking that becomes an issue. And I think especially when we get kids in the junior grades, grade 9 and grade 10, and they haven't learned how to think properly, and that resorting to AI is limiting them. And so when I see my kids in grade 12, I always talk about authentic voice. I really want their ideas. And I'm not suggesting that AI can't be incredibly helpful. I think it can. It's now, again, we don't want to be dinosaurs. We want to be able to hopefully embrace it and figure out the best way that that can help our students. And yeah.
Exactly. Now, you are known for your passion for teaching Shakespeare, especially King Lear.
Yeah.
What draws you to that particular play, and how do you help your students connect with it?
I was in grade 12 when I first read King Lear, and I didn't enjoy it. I thought, this is an 80-year-old man who makes a stupid mistake right off the bat. And I had no empathy for him. I had no understanding of why would you care, right? Why would you care about this guy who makes this mistake? And I always tell my kids this story too, because I understand. I said, you're 17, you're 18 years old. Like, you don't care about an 80-year-old person. And so then I tell them, I said, I read it again in university. And all of a sudden I had a prof whose specialty was Shakespeare. And I said, all of a sudden my understanding of the play changed. And then I get married and I have my own children and I become a parent. And without spoiling King Lear, when you see Lear walking in with his daughter in his arms, sobbing, howling like an animal, it breaks my heart, because no parent should go through that. And so, and I've been dealing with the loss of my parent. I'm dealing with my mom getting older. And so I'm able to bring my empathy, my understanding to it. And so what I try to do is try to say, yes, you might be 17 and you might think this man is stupid, but try to understand what he has just experienced. And I think the way that I teach it, I seem to get a lot of feedback of kids that really get it. I've had a couple of kids, I have to say, who have cried at the end when they see Lear walking in, and they get it, they understand it. And I think it's giving them that perspective from my perspective, and sort of saying, he's not just the stupid 80-year-old man. He's going through something so huge, and it's lovely when I see some kids nodding and they understand. Yeah, it's wonderful. And the play is
let's
so beautiful.
boil this down a little bit more. What creative strategies do you use to bring drama and literature alive in your classroom?
Well,
that's the nub, isn't it?
It is.
Bring it alive so kids can understand it in this modern day where they're being bombarded with TVs and videos and all this highfalutin stuff hitting them all the time.
It's true. Those jolts per minute, and you go back and you step back and you say, oh my gosh, Shakespeare. And they think it's a totally different language. They're completely, and I said, it's not, it's just older, right? And I try to explain that. But one of the activities I do, and I get some really good feedback from my kids, is we go to the auditorium. Port Credit being an older school, we have a fabulous 500-seat theater with this beautiful stage and curtains. And I say, okay, everybody up on the stage, and I give them a speech, and I give them very little context at this point, because I said, I just want you to read it. And I said, as you're reading it out loud, I said, I don't want you to pay attention to anybody else. I really want you to think about yourself. You have become Lear. And I said, I want you to imagine, and I'll tell them, I'll give them instructions. I'll say, okay, start reading out loud. And I said, I want you to be really, really angry. And I said, I want you to shout it so that the people in the cafeteria can hear me. And then I'll stop them and I'll say, okay, now, and I always bring my mother up in this, because when my mother got her very quiet voice and she would say, Jennifer, I'm very disappointed in you, I knew I was in trouble. So I say, I want you to think about this. So I want you to do the speech this way with that really quiet voice. And then I'll have them change direction, and I'll have them, and what they come to understand throughout this whole speech is that he's vacillating. He can't figure out why his daughters are doing this to him, and he moves back and forth. And so they figure this out, and I have them stomping their feet. So I try to show them that it's not just about sitting in a desk. It's not just about sitting in a desk with a book in front of them. We have to get up and really play with those parts. I try to be very I tend to be a little bit dramatic in class, so I try to show them, that there's these things are happening. I grab the kids out of their desks and I say, okay, come up to the front and show us how would we stage this, and explain. So I think that movement, I think that ownership and that analysis and letting them sort of figure it out is always so key to their enjoyment of it. And a lot of the kids will say that was my favorite part of the study. So.
Okay, well, this is what I'm trying to drill down on, because I'm sure a lot of beginning teachers have been tasked with teaching Shakespeare, and they shake their heads and they say, oh my goodness, how can I do this? Because that is the low rung of the teaching schedule. They get thrown the job that nobody else wants.
Well, absolutely. And there are lots of schools now, and maybe I might be the dinosaur that I was just referring to, but there's a lot of schools where they are shelving Shakespeare. That is the big movement right now. And what my goal is to show, trust me, I teach a lot of contemporary literature as well, but I really want them to understand that everything that happens in Lear, in Macbeth, in Hamlet has a connection. Right. We look at Macbeth, we look at Breaking Bad, we look at Hamlet, we look at the political situation. Like, there's so many connections. And I think to just completely ignore Shakespeare because he's old or because he's difficult is completely eliminating him from the kids' understanding of English literature. Right? There's so many, I've been looking at a lot of different authors recently and looking at how we deal with the age of Shakespeare, how we deal with race in Shakespeare, and as long as we're addressing it, I think we can really make it relevant. The kids can understand that, yes, there is a reason that these plays have stuck around. Again, there's a lot of younger teachers who don't want to do that. They don't see the relevance. And I, as a leader in my department, I really try to show them that there is an importance to it. There is something that these kids can get out of it.
Yeah, I think they're taking the easy road out by just jettisoning something that's a bit problematic.
Agreed. And if I may, sir, that's the whole point. That's the whole point of literature, is that it is supposed to be problematic. It is supposed to be bothersome. It's supposed to get us. I have a sign in front of my door, and it essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but it says, by walking in this classroom, you recognize that something you read might bother you, that something you read might push you to think about things from a different perspective. And that's exactly what I say to my kids. And so I try to get the younger teachers to understand that we're going to have to deal with some issues that are difficult, that are bothersome. And that's my whole sort of, focus when it comes to.
So is that what you find most rewarding about teaching senior students at such a pivotal time in their academic and personal development?
I will tell anybody who listens, I am not a great junior teacher. For grade 9s and 10s, I'm not. I'm good. Like, I can do it. But I have really been focusing on the senior students for the past couple of years. And I think what I love in all units is that we can have those discussions that really can be difficult, that we can have that maturity in the classroom to talk about things. So we talk about, in my first unit, before we even get to Shakespeare, we talk about censorship. We talk about the art versus separating the art and the artist. We talk about representation, who gets to tell a story, who gets to be represented in film. And we've got kids at Port Credit. We've got kids from a vast range of backgrounds, and we are a very diverse school. And so you get all of these perspectives. And I love having those conversations. And some days we won't even talk about curriculum. We go off and have these discussions about these issues, because my biggest thing is when we're in the classroom, I say, listen, you all need this grade 12 credit. It doesn't matter if you're going into engineering, if you're going into business, if you're going into English, if you're going into social studies, it doesn't matter. You all need this credit. And what we do in these four walls of this classroom is so important. And I try to show them that there are connections to that outside world. It's so key for their understanding. And I know most of my kids are not going to be studying English in university or in college, but they have to have that understanding of those issues and that critical thinking.
So, how do you support your department in adapting to evolving curriculum standards, digital tools, or shifting student needs?
We meet regularly. We do professional development, and I actually rely on some of my younger teachers to teach me. Right, I'm one of the older teachers, but I'm also, and I might be the teacher who's been teaching longest, but I'm not the one that has all the information. And so what we all try to do is share those bits of information. I've got a young man who's one of my lead teachers. The Ontario curriculum is now moving to all grade 11 students will be taking a Native Voices class. So in grade 11, their entire course will be Indigenous authors. And so he has been my lead. And so he and I work together in order to establish this course. And then we have, younger teachers who are working with the grade 9s and 10s. And I ask them, we all spend our summers finding new texts. Can we find new things? And again, I use my younger teachers. I also use my children. I ask them to read books for me every year because I know that they're closer to the students that we teach than I am. And so last year I had my daughter who was 19 at the time. I said, could you read these 2 books for me? Let me know what you think. So I think I may have gotten away from your original question, but I really try to use the resources around me in order to implement all of these changes that we're seeing in education.
You answered it very well, because that's what our listeners want to hear. Now, here's a different question.
Okay.
Can you share a moment where a student's growth or engagement with a text really stood out to you? Something that stayed with you?
Oh my gosh, there have been so many. I have been so lucky. I think, as I was preparing to talk to you, I was thinking about that. And I thought there was one young woman, her name was Imtisal. And Imtisal, I taught her, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago. And Imtisal came to see me and she told me that she had been accepted to Harvard. And I said, oh my gosh, Harvard. Like, that was incredible, right? We don't get a lot of students who get accepted to American universities. And I said, that is amazing. And I said, what are you studying? And she said, well, I'm doing a major in, and I have to admit, after so many years, I can't remember, but it was biomedical engineering, blah, 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 blah. Like, it was a long, long title. And I said, Imtisal, that's amazing. And she said, but Mrs. Turner, she said, I'm doing a minor in English. And I said, really? And I'm actually going to get choked up at this point. And I said, really? And she said, it was your class. She said, I needed to make sure that I kept up with my English because she said, you had such a passion for literature. And she said, you brought such life to it. And she said, I couldn't just ignore it. And so she went to Harvard and did a degree in biomedical engineering, blah, 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 with a minor in English. It was amazing for me to have that. I've had students who've said they've never liked Shakespeare before, and now they do. I've had students who said they've never liked English, period, before, and now they do. But Imtisal was one of my favorite stories.
So how do you blend your personal passions, such as travel, time at your cottage, reading, with your teaching philosophy? How do you balance it all?
If you walk into my classroom, there are pictures of my travel, pictures of my family. I teach a great story called Sunrise on the Veld by Doris Lessing. And there's a picture that I have that I took when we were traveling in Tanzania. And it's a picture of a lion up in a tree. And it's this beautiful picture. And my husband blew it up and put it on a canvas for me. And I'm always able to explain. And I link that. I say, okay, guys, we're talking about Sunrise on the Veld. We're talking about Southern Africa. And I said, take a look at that picture. My students know all about my family. They know about my love of travel. I have my children, my 2 kids, have very different middle names. And I often teach that to my kids. So, Dr. Al, if you have a really good book, what would you normally call it? If it's a great book and you can't wait to get into it and you can't wait to continue reading it.
Oh,
It's often called,
It's my passion. It's my love. Like I
it's
love
called,
reading.
it's called a page turner,
Aha.
right? What's my
Yes.
last name? Turner.
Ah, there you go. There you
And
go.
my daughter's middle name is Paige, so she is a page turner. My son has a middle name, and his name is Macduff, and he was from his mother's womb untimely ripped, so it comes from Macbeth. So my students all know about these stories. So I really try to link, the travel with the pictures. I tried to my family stories. My pictures are everywhere. I was just talking about the word flibberty-gibbet in King Lear, and they all said, "How do you know how to pronounce that?" And I said, "Well, it's from The Sound of Music." And so I try to personalize every story that I tell, so that the kids can understand it. And I said, it's not all that important. I said, I'm going to give you little facts that you'll never need again in your life, but hopefully it will resonate with you. And so again, the middle names of my kids are Flibberty Gibbet or the picture of the lion in the tree. I really try to make that connection with them.
So looking ahead, what's something you're excited about to explore or implement in your teaching or leadership role in the coming year or years?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I just got my headship renewed for another 5 years, which is fantastic. And in 5 years, I will be retiring. So I will be retiring in June of 2030. And I am really looking forward to, as I mentioned about the NBE course, I'm looking forward to adding new texts. But I'm also looking forward to sort of helping the young teachers really get ready to take over. Because I know that, as I said, I will be finishing in 2030. My contract will be up then, and I can walk away. I know, again, that we're getting younger teachers coming in, and I'm hoping to be able to share my experience with them. On a personal note, I'm taking a semester off in September of 27, where my husband and I will travel for 5 months. And I always found when my husband and I traveled before with the kids, I found that really rejuvenated me. And so I'm really hoping that I'll explore some new countries and be able to bring that into my department. As I said, I spend my summers at the cottage reading. Last year, I think I read 14 or 15 novels, trying to find new texts for the students, and so that's a goal of mine as well. But I'm really looking forward to doing some more traveling and bringing that experience into the classroom.
You know, I'm a cottager too, and I can understand your love of it. My wife loves it even more than I. I mean, from the months of May to September, cottage season is sacred. So
You
we're
betcha.
out there all the time, and it's something that our whole family's out there. Our 4 daughters and all our grandchildren live out there. So
Yeah.
it's really a special time, not only just because of the cottage, but because it's a family time as well.
Yeah, my husband is a teacher as well. And so we've had this cottage. This will be our 16th summer out there. And so our kids, that's what they knew. My daughter is now 20 and my son is 18. But that's how they spent their summers, was up at the cottage, learning to ski, learning to canoe, learning to paddleboard, whatever. And it has been that family time. And last summer and this summer has been weird because we're sort of empty nesters. The kids have had to stay in the city and work, and so my husband and I go up, and it's just the two of us, and they come up whenever they can. My mom comes up to join us as well, but the cottage is definitely one of our piece of heaven. It's wonderful, and it does give you that opportunity with the job that we have to recharge, to really just to take that time. As I said, both my husband and I spend time reading and trying to figure out how can we better improve our courses for the next year. But the cottage is wonderful. It's my favorite place to be. We just came back today, so we were up there for the Easter weekend.
Okay. Now, if there was one thing you could change about education today, what would that one thing be?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I would really have to think about that. I I think as it relates to English, I think it is this idea that, it's not this. I would love to change people's mindset that it's not this pointless course. I would like to have the people that make the decisions sort of come into my classroom and say, it's not. What we do is really important. I'd love to convince people that the arts are really important, that English is really important. We've got a world with STEM, and I appreciate that. And I love the fact that we're moving to STEAM and the fact that arts are important. But I'd love to change the mindset that, we could just, reading is so valuable. I teach quite a few texts that just talk about the importance of the imagination and how we can really sort of use that imagination in all aspects. And I think that would probably be the biggest thing that I would want to do.
It has been such a pleasure to have you on my show today. I can just feel the passion that you still create and love for your work. And it's no wonder you've been reappointed for another 5 years and will continue that until you retire. But I don't think your retirement is going to end with a stop of your passion. I think it's going to be created in another way.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Al. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and yeah, I'm excited to see what the next 5 years will bring. But then after that, where my love of English takes me.
For sure. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And friends, if you would like to know more about how to develop your curriculums and your love for education, make sure you check back for each and every episode of The Elite Educator, because we go into new frontiers to help your passion stay at the top and make you an elite educator. Bye for now and have a fantastic day.